guys! Today we are going to be talking about Chapter 5 from So You Want to Be an Interpreter. The chapter starts off by discussing schemas and cultural frames. Schemas, actually, the plural is actually schemata, but your book calls it schemas to simplify things. Schema, basically what that is, you've heard it in other words before if you haven't got a good understanding of it. You've heard it used in, like for example, building plans are called schematics. That really comes from a place of just knowing what the bare bones structure of something is. So what's the plan for it, what's the structure of it. And each of us has our own schema. We grow up and we have our own cultural frames, we have our own, even, and like I've said in some of the postings, whether or not you think you have a culture, you have a culture, and it will at some point will be counter to somebody else's. I promise you it's going to happen. You may not even realize it. It's going to happen. Anyway, as far as schema goes though, each of us has our own, I don't know, just things that we've grown up knowing that others may not be familiar with. We have certain experiences that have influenced us to a place of knowledge in certain areas and probably a lack of knowledge in other areas. So as interpreters we have to be aware of that because our schema, our cultural frames are never going to be the same as our clients. It's like your fingerprint. It's never going to be identical to anyone else's. And so henceforth we're trying to take our own schema, and then we've got to realize that there's at least two other people involved in any other interpreting interaction. There's at least going to be one deaf client and one hearing client, at least. And so now we've got to take into consideration, what do I think their schema might be? What do I think their viewpoint might be? And it's a very difficult job. Interpreting is not easy, or everybody would do it. Anyway, your book discusses different kinds of worldviews you might have. If you look at the different PowerPoint slides, the second slide talks about physical worldviews, and the book discusses how that could be gender, it could be the way someone dresses, it could be their age, their body shape, it could really factor in quite a few things. And you know, I'm the type of person that I really don't judge a book by its cover. I know very good and well that just because somebody's all glamored up doesn't mean that they're not slumming it, and vice versa. It doesn't mean that they've got their life all together. I've learned this very, very well. However, we just kind of, in our brains, we jump to these conclusions of people when we first see them. And as an interpreter, the honest truth is you have to. You have to already assume, when I first meet a deaf client, I don't know anything about them other than what I can see, their physical appearance. And so I automatically have to make some assumptions, unfortunately, and I know everybody says not to assume, but you have to make some assumptions, because now I'm having to judge, as we talked about in previous chapters, what is their register? Do I feel like, based upon the way that they're dressed, based upon how they carry themselves, what kinds of vocabulary in English do I think that they would use if they were a hearing person, and vice versa, what do I think that the hearing person would look like if they were signing an ASL? And it's very difficult, but you do have to look at some of those factors as far as how are they dressed, what do they look like, those kinds of things, their age, all of that. Another worldview perspective is based on psychological aspects, and your book describes this as looking at people, trying to see if you feel like they're curious about the world, are they insecure, do they seem full of themselves. There's a lot of things that you kind of have to look at when you're trying to interpret for people and decide, am I going to sound timid when I'm saying this? Should I sound timid? Maybe I would be timid if I were saying this, but they seem very bold in the way that they're stating something. I really have to factor all of that in whenever I'm making an interpretation, so the psychological aspect is very important. Also roles. Your book defines that as being any kind of social position that person might have, whether it is their profession, whether it's their status as far as where they live, socioeconomic status, all of that is involved in their role. Are they a student? Any of that. And your role, not as much, unfortunately, I think, well, I don't mean to say unfortunately, but not as much in American culture, but in a lot of other cultures, people respect their elders. I guess we do here too, it just depends on where you live. But In other cultures, people very much might look up to the police, or your interactions with certain people are going to be different than if it were with someone else. My interaction with my little sister is certainly going to be very different than my interaction with my doctor. I'm going to use different language. I'm just going to interact in a completely different way. Nothing against my little sister. I love my little sister. Anyway, next you're on slide 5. We're talking about interactions. And you can kind of, well, I would say you can tell a lot about a person by how they interact with other people. Do they seem aloof? Do they seem judgmental of other people? And even with this, again, kind of like with the physical thing or with any of these things, you've got to be careful because, as many of you guys may know, shy people, for example, sometimes come across as rude or aloof, or they must think they're better than me, when really they're just shy and they don't know how to express themselves very well. And instead they come across probably as the exact opposite of how they mean to come across, honestly. So you do still have to be careful about that, but how are they interacting with other people? Are they intending to be rude? Are they intending to offend someone? Or do you think that that's just a cultural mediation type issue that you might need to smooth over as the interpreter, maybe explaining both sides of it to each party and such? Definitely something to consider. Next, it talks about membership. Membership can be what church you attend, what synagogue you attend, what political party you're a member of, any of those types of things. Even gender could be a membership. I certainly feel like it's a membership. I think they should give you a card, male or female, I don't know. Sometimes I didn't feel like I fit too well into the female category, but I'm getting there, but it is a membership, and so it is something to consider when you're interpreting, just because, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, some of you guys might have been in this class, and so I apologize if I'm telling tales about your class, but recently there was a class on campus where one of our deaf professors, who's also a pastor, was telling somebody that something was, and he signed, baloney. Well, that's his sign for baloney. Anyway, the interpreter, he didn't say baloney, he just did this. And so the interpreter kind of asked him a little bit about it. She didn't know anything about him, and he signed it again, and I guess he kind of mouthed it. Well, she thought he said bullshit. Pardon my French. Anyway, so that's what she voiced for him. And it wasn't until later, when he was telling the students about himself, that it came out that he was a pastor, and all of a sudden I think that this interpreter just went pale and realized that she had voiced something that this person probably would not have said, and she judged that based off of his membership. And certainly after class she asked him about it, and he was like, "You said what?" And I had to come in the next day and smooth things over as a fellow faculty member. It was pretty funny, actually. But we make mistakes, and that's what I told those students, and that's what I told the teacher, and I told the other interpreter that, for that matter. I was like, you're gonna make mistakes. We're going to judge incorrectly sometimes until we find out more information. You don't always have that information to start out with, and so she shouldn't feel too badly about it. Anyway, next we're going to start talking about privilege, and I'm going to save that for the next video just because that's pretty intense in and of itself. So enjoy.